I have just 20 minutes to go through this talk, and I just set a timer so that I can stay with the 20 minutes. Meanwhile, if somebody can solve the echo problem, that would be great. So you have a handout that describes gives an outline for the presentation. Okay, great, the echo just stopped. You have an outline that gives a handout that gives an outline of the presentation, and then on the other and on the bottom of the page, some references relevant to it. So what I'm talking about is the long-term harm of early academic training. And I'm going to start by describing a program and a research study associated with that program that was conducted a few years ago in the state of Tennessee in the United States. And this is the Tennessee preschool program and an experiment associated with that. So the state of Tennessee decided at the state government level that they were going to offer a free preschool program for fourth grade, for 4-year-olds who came from impoverished families. So in order to enroll in this school, the child had to be 4 years old and had to come from a family whose income was below the United States poverty level, the official poverty level. And so the state they hired experts, they designed what was regarded as a high quality program. The teachers in the program all had to have at least bachelor's degrees and certifications in teaching. They were well paid at a level relevant to the equivalent to that of elementary school teachers generally. The program was designed and certified by the National Institute for Early Research, Education Research as of the highest standards and so on. So the point I want to make is that the state put a lot of effort and money into this program, developed a program that seemed to be highly suited according to the so-called education experts who evaluated it. In keeping with the prejudice that people from impoverished families, the children from impoverished families need a head start in academic training, the idea was that this program would be quite heavy in academic training. The children 4 years old would be given training in reading skills and number skills, mathematics, and so on, rather intensively, with the idea that this would help them when they got into kindergarten and then subsequently into elementary school. So it turned out that there were more families that qualified and wanted to enroll their children than these preschools, or many settings for this, than these preschools could accommodate. So this set the perfect conditions for an experiment, and researchers at Vanderbilt University decided to do an experiment, a controlled experiment, in which they made a random choice, basically a flip of the coin, to determine of those who wanted to be in the program, which ones would be in the program and which ones would not. There were approximately 3,000 students in all, 3,000 children in all, half of them in the program, half of them not in the program. Now, what the researchers decided to do, to their credit, is to follow these students, these young people, all the way up to 6th grade. So they didn't just look at them while they were in the preschool program. They assessed how they're doing when they were in kindergarten, how they were doing again in 3rd grade, and how they were doing in 6th grade. And here is the sad results. In kindergarten, no surprise, at the beginning of kindergarten, those who had been taught some reading skills and some number skills were better at a test of those very skills that they had been taught than those who had not been taught. No surprise. You know, you teach something to people and then you test them shortly afterwards, and they know it better than the people you didn't teach. But the point of this program was supposed to be to help them all the way through school. So when they looked at the children in 3rd grade, what they found is on every single measure, the kids who were not in this program were doing better than the kids who were in this program. They're doing better on every academic test. There were tests in science, in reading, in mathematics, and they were also better behaved. They were less likely to get into trouble, less likely to break school rules, and so on and so forth. By the time these children reached sixth grade, the difference was even greater, large difference. The children who had been in the preschool program not only scored more poorly on tests of mathematics and reading and science than those who were not in the program, but they were twice as likely to have been diagnosed with a learning disorder like dyslexia, almost twice as likely. In fact, the actual numbers were that 15% of the children in the preschool, who had been in the preschool program by sixth grade, had been diagnosed with a learning disorder, most commonly dyslexia, but sometimes other supposed disorders, compared to just 8% in the control group who had such a diagnosis. They were 50% more likely to have been in behavioral trouble with the school, sometimes even for violent behavior in the school. So somehow this program had backfired. The program created worse performance as the children went on than those who were not in the program. Now, mind you, the children who were not in the program were just at home in impoverished families, where that supposedly is not a great environment for early academic type development. But yet those children, by the time of sixth grade, were doing far better, not even just a little bit better, far better than the children who were in this preschool program. So what could account for these findings? What could possibly explain it? I'm going to be very brief in listing some possible explanations, but I think you can probably think of explanations yourself. The first is that you take little children who are not really ready for this stuff, who don't want this stuff, who are not interested in this stuff, and you force them through it, and they develop mental blocks. They develop a low opinion of themselves. They develop a sense of shame about that thing, about their academic abilities. And then they go on already predisposed to have a block about it. This is not my thing. I hate this. I'm no good at this. And that sense stays with them, and it has a cumulative effect such that they do less with it. And the cumulative effect is by sixth grade, they're way behind their peers as a result of that. Another possibility related to that is, you take little kids and this is not normal for little kids. They're not designed to be sitting in their seats looking at worksheets. They're designed to be running around, playing, exploring, having fun with other kids, and that's what they should be doing. But you force them to sit in their seats and do this kind of schoolwork, and what is going to happen? They develop a hatred towards school. They develop a rebellious attitude towards school. So maybe that carried on. That would explain the misbehavior. That would explain why they're getting into trouble more often in school than those who were just in the control group. Another possibility is that training them in this stuff leads to a kind of superficial learning. They're not really learning it. They're learning sort of to go through the motions of it. They're learning how to pronounce words. They're learning some procedures for adding numbers, but they don't understand what it's all about. And maybe learning in a superficial way that actually interferes with learning in a more meaningful way, a way that involves actual understanding. So that's another possible explanation. And then still another possible explanation is that it may not be so much what was done in the preschool that was harmful, but what was not done and what was done at home. So these children were at home, but they were not necessarily in a seriously deprived environment in terms of child development, economically deprived, but maybe not developmentally. Maybe they had lots of opportunity to play. Maybe they had lots of opportunity to explore. Maybe they had lots of opportunity to do the things that children are naturally designed to do. The kinds of things where they are learning how to control their own behavior, they're developing interests, they're getting interested in things like reading, they're getting interested in other things, so that by the time they start school, they're a little bit more ready for this kind of stuff than the children who are put in the preschool. Now, this finding from the Tennessee study was presented as a big surprise, as if nobody expected this. But if people had paid attention to previous research, they would have known that this would have harmful effects. I have looked back every single study that I've been able to find that looks at early childhood academic education has shown that when you try to teach early academic skills to little children, it backfires in the long run. Very few studies look at the long run. Most of them just look at the immediate effect, or maybe the effect in kindergarten or first grade. And they see a little bit of boost of that early training, so they think it's successful. But every study that I've found that follows them up through third grade or beyond has found that they do more poorly as a result of that early training than they would otherwise. I'm not going to go through all those studies. I listed 3 of them on the handout that you have, but let me mention one of the studies, which is a study that was done in Germany in the 1970s. So in the 1970s, in many countries, school systems were beginning to teach academic skills in kindergarten. Kindergarten had previously been a place for play. It's a nice German word, garden for children, place for children to play, to get used to being away from home, to get used to being with other kids, how to get along with other kids, singing songs, being read to, all those kinds of things. But some school systems were beginning to teach reading skills and number skills in kindergarten. And so people in Germany began to wonder, should we start doing this in Germany? Now, what the Germans did, to their credit, is before switching over to this at any kind of massive scale, they said, let's do an experiment. So they had 50 kindergartens that adopted academic training and 50 that did not. 50 just regular kindergartens, playing, doing the things that kindergartens had always traditionally done, and another 50 where academic training was worked into this. It wasn't the only thing they did. They also played and they sang and they did other things, but academic training was in. Now, to their credit, they followed the kids up all the way to grade 4. And by grade 4, just as happened many years later in the Tennessee study, those that had academic training in kindergarten were doing more poorly on academic tasks than those who just had play-based kindergarten. So the German government, to their credit, they decided, okay, heck with it, we're not going to have academic training. And to my knowledge, they still don't. They're still one of the countries that kindergarten is still a place to play and explore, and they start academic training later on. So so this seems to be a rule. This seems to be, the United States doesn't pay attention, and our education people, the people kind of in ultimate authority, don't seem to pay attention to the results of research, and so they continue to push early academic training, even though what the results are is that the more academic training they push, the lower the scores go. And especially as we move to increasing preschool with academic training, increasing academic training, we're just burning kids out before they even get started. Now, I want to briefly describe another experiment. And that was an experiment done in the 1930s, late 1920s and early 1930s, in the city of Manchester, New Hampshire. The superintendent of schools in Manchester, New Hampshire, had been touring the elementary schools and quizzing the kids with very simple little story problems that involve numbers. And he was appalled at how terrible they were at this. And he said to himself, these kids are not stupid. I know they're not stupid. I can engage in intelligent discussions with them. But as soon as I bring numbers into it, they act like they're stupid. And so he developed the theory that the reason they're stupid about numbers is because of the training in mathematics that they're getting in the schools. he had the idea that somehow teaching them arithmetic skills, as it would have been called at that time, mathematics skills, how to add numbers, subtract numbers, teaching them multiplication tables and all the kind of stuff that's typically taught in elementary schools, was, in his words, chloroforming their minds about anything they had to do with numbers. It was like they just turned off their minds whenever they heard anything about numbers. So he developed the theory that the children would learn mathematics better if they didn't teach the children any mathematics until 6th grade. So he decided to do an experiment where some of the elementary schools, some of the elementary classrooms in his district would not teach any mathematics until 6th grade. No adding, subtracting, none of that stuff. Nothing about numbers. Well, they could talk about numbers, they could measure things, they could do things that were kind of fun, but nothing about calculation with numbers until 6th grade. The other children in the control condition would be taught as usual in elementary school, taught mathematics all the way along. And then to do this as a controlled experiment, he invited graduate students from Boston University to come up and test the children periodically as they went through elementary school, both in mathematical reasoning, story problems, where you kind of have to know what it means to add numbers or subtract them and so on, where you have to kind of figure out what you're supposed to do with these numbers, and also to test them in the typical school math. Can they add a column of numbers? Do they know the multiplication tables and the like? What he found in this experiment is all along the way, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, those who were not taught mathematics until 6th grade were better at story problems than those who were taught it. By 6th grade, when they started teaching regular school mathematics to the children, by the end of 6th grade, those children who were not taught any math until 6th grade were every bit as good as the other children in school mathematics, adding columns and numbers and all of that, and they were still better at story problems. So he came to the conclusion that it's a mistake to try to teach mathematics to young children. It makes much more sense. Let them learn about numbers in the course of life. Let them have a reason. Let them know, though, that there's some reason. There's some good reasons for adding numbers and knowing how. Let them develop, in other words, the intellectual interest in numbers, the skills in numbers, the motivation to know about numbers before we teach them anything about numbers. So the point I want to make here is a difference between academic skills and intellectual skills. Let me interrupt for just a moment that I had a timer going, and unfortunately that timer stopped, and I'm not exactly sure when we started. So if somebody wants to warn me when we've got 5 minutes left, and there's a way you can do that, feel free to do that. I don't want to go beyond the time, but also I want to finish up what I've got here if I can. So I want to say something about the difference between academic skills and intellectual skills. So academic skills are skills that can be taught in school. They're skills that really you can get people to do even if they're not motivated to do it. You can just get them to do it because they're things that can be learned by rote, by memorization, by drill, and so on. So pertaining to reading, for example, you can get children to learn the alphabet just by rote. You can get them to learn the relationship between the letters and the sounds. You can teach them phonics. You can teach them to pronounce words out loud. And that's the way early reading is usually taught. We call that reading, but of course it's not reading. What that really is just pronouncing words. Reading is when you look at a page of words and you extract meaning from it. You're reading for meaning. You're trying to learn something from those words on the page. So when you teach reading in this way to people who don't really understand or have any particular interest in reading for meaning, you're just teaching them to pronounce words. You're teaching them an academic skill, but they're lacking the intellectual foundation for that. So with regard to mathematics, you can teach children.
Now you've got the last 3 minutes, okay? Last 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, last 3 minutes. So with regard to mathematics, you can teach children to add up numbers, but if they have no understanding of why you would add up numbers, what's the good of it? If they don't have the intellectual foundation for it, it's just a waste of time. So the point really that I am leading up to, and the point that I want to lead you with, is it's a waste of time and often harmful to teach academic skills, such as pre-reading skills, number skills, to children who don't yet have the intellectual foundation and the motivation for appreciating those skills. So in many ways then, for many reasons, we're better off not trying to teach these skills to little children, to preschool children, to kindergarten children. We're better off waiting. And in fact, we're probably best off doing like Finland does. They don't teach this stuff until the children are at least 7 years old. And as you may know, Finland tends to be the country that where by the time the kids are in high school, they're outperforming kids in almost all other areas of the world. So the trend towards early academic training is a trend that would be very wise to reverse. Thank you very much for your attention to this talk. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference.